Hello, welcome into the Irish NFL show as we reach the first weekend of preseason games. Delighted to have a former guest return to the show from NFL Network, Steve Wyche. Steve, great to see you again. We did meet briefly in Arizona, but it's great to have you back on the Irish NFL show.
Oh, man, I'm so excited to be back. And look, I don't think we shared a beverage while we were there in Arizona, but maybe this year in Las Vegas if you come back to the Super Bowl.
Well, it's a bit of a, I'm probably putting something out here very early, but we are already booked for Vegas. So there you
Look
go.
At you. Look at you.
Yeah. But we're fortunate. We've got the London games. We've got the 2 Germany games before we even consider a trip out west to Vegas.
Yeah.
But I did touch on it there. Yeah, we met during the lunch break of the Radio Row period in downtown in Phoenix. We're fortunate in terms of our show to have been to the last 2 Super Bowls, but this year in Arizona had a very different feel about it. It really felt like the Super Bowl was back to the old days with the craziness that comes with Radio Row.
It really did. I mean, I remember the 2 years during the pandemic. I mean, it was a ghost town. It was heartbreaking just to see the lack of people there. And this year it's kind of back to the mayhem. And if you think, I mean, that was just, Arizona was clearing its throat for what's going to happen in Las Vegas because, everyone's going to want to be there. It's going to be absolutely bananas this February.
Yeah, I've been to Vegas twice, once on my honeymoon and then on another vacation. I'm trying to
big
give
time.
people, I'm trying to give people a thought process as to what the Strip will be like and a Radio Row all combined. It's manic. It's going to be some. It's going to be a beast. Is that a fair word to say?
Yes, it will be.
Yeah. Now we're going to get into who's going to be playing in that game. No, that's way too early. But we are reaching that kind of critical period now. We're going to have the first weekend of preseason games, and you obviously have close ties to the Falcons, so I'd like to kick off there because whilst Desmond Ridder played last season, week 13 to week 17, didn't throw a touchdown until the final game against the Cardinals. And there's obviously rookie quarterback within the division with the Panthers, but it does have a feel of a bit of a rookie type scenario for the Falcons. But what's your level of expectations for the team? Because the division is quite open. I know the Saints are deemed to be the favorites, but you could put up an argument that every team has a really good chance of prevailing and winning this division this year.
100%. I think it's anybody's division. Look, on paper, the Buccaneers probably have the most talented roster in terms of like Pro Bowlers, Mike Evans, just all the great players that they have on defense, Shaquille Barrett, Vita Vea, players like that. But their quarterback, I mean, looks like it's going to be Baker Mayfield, but is he really going to be the guy to get them over the top? They couldn't score last year. Are they going to be any better this year without, first ballot Hall of Famer quarterback? They changed the offensive coordinator, so we'll see. So to get to the Falcons, I think they're going to be really good, to be honest, because even though Desmond Ridder is still, he's the big question mark, there aren't really any other question marks anywhere else. I mean, this is a young team. They really fortified their defensive line by signing a veteran like Calais Campbell, by adding David Onyemata from the Saints, a really good interior defender who comes over with the new defensive coordinator who's coming over from the Saints. Add him next to Grady Jarrett. You sign Bud Dupree. You bring over Kadon Ellis also from the Saints to come off the edge to add to Arnold AK. I'm blanking on his last name. AK-47 is what they call him. But their defense should be much, much better. And their offense, they go out and they draft Bijan Robinson to add to Tyler Algier, who rushed for more than 1,000 yards as a rookie. Also have Cordero Patterson back there with Drake London, Kyle Pitts. They bring Matt Collins over from the Raiders, so they've got this massive receiving group in terms of size. So everything is there for Desmond Ridder. Like, he doesn't have to be great, right? In all honesty, he's got to be Brock Purdy. He's got to be a little bit better than Brock Purdy was last year, and they could be a playoff team.
We've had the Orlando on several times from the Atlantic Constitution, and just leading up to free agency, he said, keep an eye on the Falcons to go after a number of Saints players. Now, he suggested Marcus Davenport at the time, but it has kind of transpired that way. They've essentially brought over Saints defensive coordinator, the new defensive coordinator, and they've utilized players within the division that will know what it's like to play against various teams in the division to rebuild this defense in particular.
Yeah, and Ryan Nielsen, I spoke to Dennis Allen, the head coach of the Saints, about Ryan, and he said, look, the way this guy sees the game is different. Like he's a defensive line coach, right? We know how great the Saints defensive front has been for years, with Cam Jordan and Marcus Davenport and Trey Hendrickson before him and David Onyemata. He said most defensive line coaches just see the defensive front. He's like, Ryan Nielsen's, he's like, he's like, Tom Cruise on the Mission Impossible board. He's seeing stuff all over the place, and kind of this real creative genius who should really help out things up front. And then they had veteran secondary coach Jerry Gray, someone who probably should have been a head coach by now. So they've got the front and back ends covered, much like, you used to see with the Seahawks, like you saw with the Niners, when they had Chris Kasarik, the best defensive line coach in the NFL, have great secondary coaches like Joe Woods behind him. This is kind of how they got things set up. They just have to go out and play ball and score some points on offense.
We saw, I suppose, a great second half of the season for the Panthers last year after Matt Rule's firing, and obviously things have changed, and Frank Reich has come in. Bearing in mind such a strong side they have with a rookie quarterback, like, is it against the realms of possibility that they go again and really kind of finish off what these, I suppose, what they could have started in the end of the last season, ironically, for losing that game to the Bucs when it looked like for a long time they had that game won, or is it too lofty an expectation for a rookie? But bearing in mind the way the NFL is now, the scrutiny and expectation on a rookie quarterback to come in and deliver immediately, and we'll probably see that in similar enough to the Colts. But do we expect Panthers to still have their teething problems?
Oh, I think they could be okay. That defense is really good, right? And then they bring in Ejiro to be the defensive coordinator. He comes over from the Broncos, right? He's a great defensive coordinator. Used to be with the Rams.
A lot of Broncos fans disappointed that he moved on.
Yeah, he's going to be a head coach one day, and there's a lot of talent on that defense, right? So defense is going to be the anchor of what they're doing. And to bring Bryce Young along, of course, they have Miles Sanders. They've invested a ton in that offensive line over the past couple of seasons, so that should be okay. My question for them, it's like, who are the receivers, right? Okay, you go out and get Adam Thielen. Clearly, Minnesota let him go because he's getting up there in age, and they've got to pay Justin Jefferson soon. But really, who else is there? They drafted a receiver in the second round, hoping he can come around. So I just think it's going to be a ball control, very safe offense. Bryce Young, he showed in college he's as clutch as any player we've ever seen in the final minutes of games. That's huge, because you hear more and more coaches talk about, if you can win the final 4 minutes on offense of the first half and the final 4 minutes of a game, you're probably going to come up victorious. And that's what he established in college. Now, can that part carry over more so than what they did to finish up last season, because it's such a new staff and just such a new feeling there?
I know we're well removed from free agency, and obviously that trade in which the Panthers and the Bears done. But you touched on the wide receiver room for the Panthers. Were you surprised at the time, not the enormity of the value of the trade, but more so the fact that DJ Moore was actually within that package and went to the Bears? And obviously he looks like he's going to be a fantastic acquisition for the Bears. But for the Panthers to let their marquee wide receiver walk out the door in that deal, was that for me, that was quite surprising.
Well, I mean, it's one of these things. How badly do you want the quarterback? The Bears said, we'll give you our draft pick, but you got to give us your wide receiver. Right? Remember, this is the Bears team that traded for Chase Claypool last year.
Yeah, on the deadline day.
It's kind of like, we don't know if he's going to be the guy. So let's go out and get DJ Moore because he is an established player. And so, yeah, I mean, for them to have to give that up, I guarantee the Panthers didn't want to, but they also knew they had to get their quarterback for the future. And if that's what it took, they were willing to sacrifice DJ Moore to do so.
If you read a number of the beat writers are suggesting that it is an open race in terms of Kyle Trask and Baker Mayfield, and Baker Mayfield has done nothing so far to kind of really win the people over there. I don't know if that's an unfair statement, but obviously we're going to see both of them play throughout the course of the preseason games. And where do you stand on this? Do you ultimately believe it will be Baker Mayfield, or is it genuinely an open competition between both players?
Oh, I think it'll be Baker. Look, this is a season going in where Todd Bowles and his coaching staff knows it has to win, right? Because after this season, there's going to be significant transition, right? You've got a lot of aging players on defense that they're going to have to transition through, right? They've got to bring some new players in. And if they don't win, there could be a whole new coaching staff transitioning. So I think Baker Mayfield, being the veteran and having experience, will start the season as the quarterback. I'm not positive. I don't have any science on that, but he knows a lot more. But if they deem Kyle Trask to be the more talented, that's a battle they have to weigh, because again, they don't have a grace period of a Frank Reich, right? They don't have that. They've got to win now.
Yeah.
And so that's why I think it'd be Baker. And for everything I've heard, Baker has had a better camp than Kyle Trask, but Trask has made it interesting because he's an ascending young player. And a lot of times if you can get a quarterback who's ascending, you might say, he's the guy. The ultimate tipping scale on this is how do the other 10 players in the huddle respond, right? If they respond better to Baker, then that's who you roll with. If they spend better to Trask, if they respond better to Trask, that's who you go with.
Just moving out west and the NFC West and the 49ers, and like it's been well published over the course of the offseason, Kyle Shanahan, in terms of Brock Purdy, is the starter despite the injury at the end of the previous season. Obviously, he's come through that now, and he's back and ready for the start of the season. And this Trey Lance thing is such a precarious thing because he's going to get large parts of this offseason. Is it an offseason which he's put himself in the shop window for another team if they were to pick up an injury before the start of the season, that they would make a move, or is it just clearly to see? Because he's played so little football over the course of the last 3 years, through injuries, and even when he came out of the college program, we haven't seen enough of him to really get a proper kind of prognosis of how good he is as a quarterback. And then you read the reports that Sam Darnold understands the offense, which Kyle Shanahan, and we read the story this morning, speculation that Philip Rivers had got the call last year had they got to the Super Bowl, very much a plug and play into an offensive scheme. It sounds a bit unfair. Does it matter who the quarterback is because they're so good, and Kyle Shanahan is so good and running these offensive schemes? Yeah,
but look, it matters. I mean, think about the days when the Niners had to play because of injury to C.J. Beathard and Nick Mullins, and they weren't winning, right? You got to have a quarterback who can win you ball games. And that's why Kyle Shanahan is so in on Brock Purdy, because he's seen it in games. He's seen it in big games. I mean, the fact that Brock Purdy came in for 3 quarters in the middle of a Dolphins game and they didn't have to dumb down their offense. And then over, his starts in the regular season and in the postseason, you saw more of an emergence of Brandon Ayuk and George Kittle in the passing game. And so they were able to really run their offense. So it matters. And the trust that Purdy established with Shanahan is a huge deal. Now, when it comes to Trey Lance, I don't see them trading him, right? They've got him on a rookie contract. It's a low number. And what's the best position to be in if you're on the 49ers roster? The backup quarterback, because the starter seems to always get hurt. It is a crazy phenomenon how often the starting quarterbacks get hurt with the 49ers. So I think Trey Lance is someone they feel comfortable with. If they want to go with Darnold, then that's fine, because it's not bad being a number 3 and saying a number 2 tends to get hurt as well. I just enough depth. They'll keep all 3 quarterbacks active on game day, so they don't have to call up Philip Rivers if they make a deep playoff run and sustain an injury. But I just don't think a team is going to give up much to get Trey Lance, because we haven't seen him. And I think they like him. I mean, remember this time last year, Trey Lance was the guy. They're going into this season with Trey Lance. They understand his talent. They know he understands the offense. So I just think it's a situation where the trust that Purdy established last year is the thing that tips the scale here.
And obviously the bearing of the new rule in which the NFL allowing you to have 3 quarterbacks on the sideline on a Sunday, which I suppose was pivotal to how that championship game played out in Philadelphia with the nature of the injuries in which their quarterbacks picked up. The Raiders are an intriguing one, because people felt last year, and again, if you read it, depending on which reports, that Josh McDaniels held on to his job because financially they weren't in a position to essentially to pay off the remainder of his contract had they moved in a different direction. And Jimmy G comes in, and I know a lot of Raiders fans this side of the world are disgruntled in terms of the nature of how the Derek Carr, I suppose, saga played out in the end, in terms of giving him the last few weeks off, protecting the contract and stuff. He's moved on to pastures new. I mean, some of them don't see Jimmy G as an upgrade. Is he an upgrade on the offense in which Josh McDaniels wants to run as opposed to the quarterback?
It's a great question. I don't know if he's an upgrade, but he's different. I think on Derek's side and on the Raiders side, they just felt things had run its course. And I think most people would agree to that. I mean, Derek was there for 9 years. Josh McDaniels came in and just realized, we're changing. I mean, the Raiders, we look at Derek, but look, they also traded away Darren Waller, right? They got rid of Mac Hollins. I mean, there's a lot of players on that offense who are not there, who were, who Josh inherited. So he clearly is going in a new direction. And in terms of Jimmy G, it's all about his durability. It is 1,000% his durability. He is a very steady quarterback, right? He can get you out of jams. He can play the offense the way you want to play it. He stays on schedule. Whereas Derek was kind of risk averse. Jimmy will make some throws, right? That's why defenses know he's going to give you one interception attempt a game. Jimmy is going to give one up a game. And that's because he's not scared. It's all about durability with him. So to say it's an upgrade, I don't know. I just think the fact that they wanted to turn the page, they landed on a really good player who teammates, media, if you've ever met Jimmy Garoppolo, he is one of the nicest people I have ever met in my life. Like, I love the guy, right? And I think there's a billion people who've met him who will feel the same way about him. And the fact that it translates so deeply with his teammates. Remember, George Kittle used to come to the press conferences with Jimmy G shirts and stuff on. Like, that's a refreshing thing that I think the Raiders needed out of their leader. So we'll see if it translates into wins and losses, because frankly, I don't think the offense is going to be the issue with the Raiders. I think defensively, they got a lot of
holes. I
mean, getting Marcus Peters at corner is going to help, but I think on their back, their back seven, they still, their back 6 or 7, they still got a lot of questions to answer.
Yeah, my concern on Marcus Peters is he's a fantastic player, but there's times he loses the run of himself, and it's the off-field stuff that we see on the sidelines. Like, the Raiders will need all the players pulling together. I just want to jump back to Waller, because you touched on Kittle and the great relationship which he had with Jimmy G, and he was probably his most effective player when they played together in the 49ers. As a Giants fan, I'm delighted that Waller is with us now.
I'm sure you are.
If he stays injury-free, he looks like an absolute beast and a fantastic tight end. But I would have thought the Raiders would have looked at that despite the injury and said, he's the kind of player that Jimmy G could utilize to keep his offense moving throughout the course of the field and on the drives. So it was a little bit of a surprise that whilst the injuries are concerned, that they moved away from it. Is it a complete refresh in a sense?
No, I mean, I think the dynamic with Waller and the coaching staff just wasn't great. I mean, neither side seemed thrilled with one another. Like, Josh didn't really know how to use him, even though he's just incredible. He's the queen on the chessboard. And I think Waller was just kind of wondering what they were doing. Remember, the Raiders didn't really settle in offensively until they decided to give the ball to Josh Jacobs.
Yeah.
The absence. But I tell you what, Waller with the Giants is going to be fantastic. He is going to be the best thing to happen to Daniel Jones. So smile widely, because Darren Waller is going to have a pretty strong year up there in New York.
Yeah, truly looks like a true number one receiver, albeit a tight end. But you can put him out on the perimeter in the X. There's a lot of options now for David and Kafka. I just want to jump into the NFC North, and the Lions are like this year's kind of team that everybody wants to love, and everybody has high expectations. They're now the division favorites for the first time in a long time. I saw the news last week. It's the first time for years in which the Lions have sold all their season tickets in August as opposed to getting into the season. And the Vikings, we had Harrison Smith on the show last week, and we asked him the question, how much is he motivated by the fact that people are dismissing the Vikings on the back of last season? They had obviously the difficult loss in the playoffs, but they still won 11 games. And we also had Kevin O'Connell on the show, and he's a fantastic guest and interview, a true gent. And what was evident that they all rallied around and really loved playing for Kevin O'Connell. Should we be dismissing them again because of the nature of their wins last year? Or are the Lions really recognized that team within the division that should win the division this year?
Okay, great little double-barreled question there. So let's get to the Vikings. Yeah. We should not dismiss them, right? Kirk Cousins is still a very good player. They've got the best wide receiver in the NFL with Justin Jefferson. Jordan Addison, the rookie you saw last night, he's got some stuff to him, right?
Yeah.
Losing Dalvin Cook, we'll see if Alexander Mattison can make up for him. Offensively, I think they're going to be fine. The Vikings' issue is defense, right? People want to talk Kirk Cousins. They couldn't stop anybody last year. So now they bring in Brian Flores. He's putting in a new scheme, much more of what they wanted to do. They get Danielle Hunter back. They've got some pieces. I was at their training camp, and Flores said, that secondary is still, in development. Their linebacking core, they're still trying to figure that out. They'll get it figured out. If Minnesota can get some takeaways and stop people and finish closer to more of a top 16 defense, they'll be right back in it. But to get to the other part of the question, I, along with so many others, are really, bullish on the Lions. And this is speaking, and I've spoken to a lot of coaches around the league and assistant coaches, one of whom said to me, if the Lions are not a playoff team, that might be the biggest disappointment in the NFL. Because they know offensively, first off, Ben Johnson, their offensive coordinator, is spectacular. I mean, defensive coaches are like, this guy's coming up with some different stuff. And remember, he turned down head coaching interviews because he wanted to stay in Detroit. That's a first. People want to stay with the Lions. People are usually, rushing out the door because of the culture and everything that's been there. So Dan Campbell has established a culture now where one of the hottest coordinators in the NFL wanted to stay. Right? To me, Jared Goff has shown he's fine. Right?
Yeah.
The things that they're going to do offensively, their offensive line is fantastic. Again, we go back to defense now. They do some things to try to beef up their front seven. It's huge. They couldn't stop the run. Couldn't stop it. And that was a huge problem in their division. And so that's where so much of everything lies with them. And they figure that Aiden Hutchinson and James Houston and some of these guys are going to be a lot better up front, but they've got to show it. And so I am really, really high. Them getting C.J. Gardner-Johnson in the back end of that defense should help. Again, that's a team, if they finish in the top 20 defensively and manage 25 plus takeaways, they could be a monster. They could be a very, very dangerous football team.
A unique story in a way for Jared Goff. Bearing in mind, many had written him off when the trade took place with Matthew Stafford, and many even felt he was a placeholder until they found the right quarterback in the draft. But it doesn't seem to be the case now. It's very much he's our guy, and we're gonna run with him going forward.
Well, they did draft Hendon Hooker out of Tennessee. So
true, yeah. A project.
Yeah, but a guy coming off a knee injury. But I mean, I think they feel really good about him, and they should. He played really well in this scheme. But there's probably going to be a question, okay, if we lose Ben Johnson, can the next coach get the most out of him? To which I say, Jared's been in this league long enough. He knows how to get the most out of himself. So it'll be interesting. He'll probably get, at best, like a Kirk Cousins tag. But frankly, that's not a bad tag to get.
Steve, two teams in the AFC, not the same division, but they're kind of tied at the hip in a way because they're going to play each other in week 5 in a game in which nobody was talking about. Now, all of a sudden, we'll get all the speculation. That is the Jets and the Broncos. One, obviously, you couldn't get more hyped up by Aaron Rodgers and the Jets by not putting them on Hard Knocks. Is it too much to think? Jets fans have gone from, we'll be satisfied with the playoffs, to now I was thinking, we've put so much around Aaron Rodgers. Should we be really challenging to win the division and make a deep run? And then the other caveat to that is a flip to the Broncos. And we are surprised with the nature of what Sean Payton put in the USA Today article, because I don't think he needs to be antagonizing any other teams, and he's got so much to work on there within Denver. Is it just a distraction that he didn't need?
Well, to get to your second question first, Sean is very strategic. I know him very well. Yeah. He said on the record what 98% of the NFL was saying off the record. So that's what I was surprised about. Like, whoa, hey, Sean, okay, we've heard all this for months, but you put it out there, and with his credentials, it carries like a big stick. But I think with
He
Sean
didn't roll
McSorley,
back. He didn't roll back on what he said. He rolled back on the nature of how he said it. Yeah.
no, Sean is not that guy. Sean, if he puts it out there, he's not going to be like Ron Rivera keeps doing and trying to make mea culpas and do things like that. I think Sean was trying to defend his quarterback and some of the things that happened before he got there by placing blame on Nathaniel Hackett and but then it's just to take shots like, oh, wow, it's just going to be a train wreck, hard knocks, all that. That was a little different. I was like, I don't know why he went there, what that has to do with anything. But we'll see. As for the Jets, they should have Super Bowl expectations because Aaron Rodgers did not come there to get to the second round of the playoffs. Right? They almost were a playoff team last year without Aaron Rodgers. That defense is really good. They got plenty of pieces on offense. Aaron Rodgers comes in instilling confidence, where Zach Wilson people were just kind of wondering, right? So he's trying to do what Tom Brady did in Tampa, right? Tom Brady walked into a team that had a ton of pieces, right? They had the Mike Evans of the world. Gronk comes with him. Alan Lazard's not Gronk, but him and Randall Cobb come with Aaron Rodgers to the Jets. But, as Robert Saleh said, hey, embrace the expectation. Let's go get it. And it should be high. If they fail, then it's going to look like the whole Brett Favre experiment, and I think Favre had them on track to get to the playoffs before he got hurt, but that's how that chapter is going to end. And who knows if that coaching staff will be back next year if they fall on their faces, which I fully don't expect them to do unless there's just, some catastrophic injuries along the way.
Steve, you've been very generous with your time. I just want to close out with, I'll put you out there, and you can avoid this one if you wish. Give me two teams who are floating under the radar. Maybe it is the Lions are floating under the radar that you think would have a better season than most people think. And is there any team, whether they made the playoffs last year, that you feel might have a little bit of a drop off compared to the previous season?
Well, I don't think we're talking about Seattle enough. I think they're going to be a really good football team. Those young players last year showed they were really good, and they're only going to get better. And I think Geno Smith's going to continue to get better. Are there some other teams? Look, that whole AFC North, I think that's the most interesting division because any of those teams can win it. As dominant as Cincinnati has been, I think Cleveland has the potential to be really, really good. That roster is loaded. I was at their training camp, and I've seen these guys for years, and I was like, man, these guys, they got players here. Zarius Smith coming along to join, Myles Garrett. And so I think that's a division that we really need to pay attention to. I think if there's some teams that can make the playoffs that can step back, as crazy as it sounds, I hate to crush you. I think the Giants could be that team. Could be one of them. We'll see. I think they've upgraded a lot with their talent.
It's a competitive division, though. Very competitive.
Yeah, and look, I don't know if Philadelphia is going to be as dominant. I know everyone's kind of penciling them into the Super Bowl. They lost a lot on defense up the middle. Now they've drafted a lot of talent, but man, that's a lot, man.
Yeah, transitioning to a new coordinator, both offensively and defensively, can be difficult.
Yeah, so and another team I think that could potentially has been written out that could potentially be halfway decent is Tennessee. I think Mike Vrabel is a hell of a coach. I think Ryan Tannehill is pretty good. I mean, this is their last shot kind of with this group of players. You can see them transitioning. And I just think they're going to be a tough out. They may not be a Super Bowl caliber team, but I think they're going to be a real tough out.
Steve, you've been very generous with your time. All will be revealed in the coming weeks and coming months. But again, you've been on before. We love having you on. You're a great guest, and hopefully we'll get you on during the season and we can discuss these off-season predictions and see how things transpire. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.